In Northern Asia, Seventh-day Adventists are still answering the call to mission. Here, vast territories are still largely unreached with the gospel. Countries such as China, Mongolia, and Japan still have relatively few Adventists compared to their overall population. Here in the Northern Asia-Pacific Division, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is sending out church planters as part of the Pioneer Mission Movement. Sponsored by supporters of Global Mission, these dedicated church planters leave their homes to start new groups of believers in foreign lands. Today, there are PMM pastors and their families scattered throughout Northern Asia, carrying with them a message of love and hope. PMM pastor Young Taek Lim and his family arrived in Taiwan 3 years ago. After spending 1 year learning Mandarin, he started looking for a place to hold meetings. He met Mrs. Achu Chun, a Seventh-day Adventist member who told him about a shop that had closed on the ground floor of the building where she lived. Pastor Lim liked the place and soon rented it to start his new church. What Mrs. Chun hadn't told him was that her own husband had stopped attending church because it was too far away. When she asked him when he would start going to church again, he would say, "When there's a church in this building." As a young woman, Mrs. Chun had been a church planter and lay pastor. Today, she still has a heart for mission.
I had my training at Taiwan Adventist Hospital. They train us to measure the blood pressure and also share the health message, New Start, for instance. And I volunteered to measure the blood pressure in the park regularly, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
When I was taking a walk in the park, I saw the lady helping people to measure their blood pressure for free, so I also joined them. We started to talk to each other. Then she shared Christianity with me and also told me there was a church nearby, and she invited me to attend the church, so I went.
Mrs. Huang had been searching for answers. A year earlier, she had lost her husband to a heart attack, and now she was recovering from heart surgery herself.
During that time, I was in very bad shape in terms of my emotions. It was a difficult time because my husband passed away 1 year ago.
Before long, Mrs. Huang was studying the Bible with Pastor Lim, along with several of her brothers and sisters.
Well, 6 out of 9 siblings are attending the church, and my prayer for the family is the rest of those 3 brothers and sisters be brought into the church, and not only those 3, but also their relatives may be brought by these siblings.
The Wangs are convinced that God has called their family, so they preach the gospel to their family. One brother, Wang Hao Chu, is a retired police officer.
I started to come to know Pastor Lim, and then he took me around when he was giving visitation and other evangelistic meetings. And Pastor Lim was a very enthusiastic pastor.
Today, he's back in the classroom studying to become a pastor at Taiwan Adventist College. The Huang brothers and sisters have shared their newfound faith with their children and spouses. Today, 15 members of the Huang family are attending church or taking Bible studies. Not far from the school, another PMM pastor and his wife are reaching out into their community. Pastor Jean Cobb Lim was trained as a physical therapist before becoming a pastor, but he and his wife felt the call to serve as missionaries. Mrs. Lim offers cooking and health classes, and Pastor Lim does massage therapy. They've also opened up an upper room as a meeting place. Mrs. In Sung Hong was the first person in Taiwan to be baptized through a PMM pastor. Although she had been attending an Adventist church and had sent her sons to an Adventist school, she wasn't yet baptized. She was the only Korean in the city where she and her Taiwanese husband lived. So she was thrilled when she learned that not 1, but 5 Korean families had moved into the area. The PMM pastors were studying the Chinese language before beginning their work. One of those pastors, Woon Song Choi, offered to study the Bible with her. then he asked her to translate for an evangelistic series. It took some persuading, but she agreed. Soon after, she was baptized.
Whenever I thought about my future, it was very much uneasy. But ever since I joined the church, uneasiness has gone away and peace eventually settled down in my heart.
Today, Mrs. Hong still translates for meetings and serves as the PMM coordinator for the Taiwan conference. But it's a labor of love for her because she donates the money she's paid back to the PMM program. In Mongolia, another PMM pastor is sharing his faith in Ulaanbaatar. One of the people he has helped introduce to Jesus is a young man known as Joy. Today, Joy works at the SDA Language Center overseeing the language lab. After he arrived in Mongolia, Pastor Park hired a printer to make brochures for an evangelistic series. He met a young worker there and invited him to church. The young man came and visited the church and seemed to enjoy it. When the brochures came, Pastor Park wasn't happy with the quality, so he asked the printer to fix them. He didn't know that his request meant that the young man would lose his job. Pastor Park noticed that the young man had stopped coming to church, so he asked around and found out he'd lost his job. He had been impressed by the young man's attitude.
Even though he attended the church just 1 week, when I asked, just would you mind go out, distribute some handbill invite to our women's meeting? He said yes, and we do it together.
So he called him and offered him a job at the language school. Today, Joy leads out in the church's youth outreach program. Young people from the church and the community meet regularly to play soccer and other sports. They even have uniforms bearing the name SDA. The young people enjoy their time together so much that they still play outdoor soccer despite bitterly cold weather.
The treatment from Pastor Park, it's like Jesus treating a sinful person, and how merciful Jesus is. And even I owe much, and I made a big mistake, and Pastor Park showed his kindness and mercy as Jesus did.
From Korea to Taiwan and Japan, from Taiwan to Japan, from Korea to Mongolia, and more, PMM pastors are reaching out to people in new countries and communities.
When I started my ministry, I wanted to do church planning. Also, I wanted to be a missionary. Both of my desires came true through the Pioneer Mission Movement Project.
With a message of hope and love, they are touching lives and doing their part to tell the world about Jesus. Thank you for supporting Global Mission, and thank you for remembering mission and missionaries in your prayers and through your offerings.